This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Kia ora, you are listening to Left From Nowhere on Otago Access Radio 105.4 FM 1575 AM. I am your host, Tyler West. I also happen to be a member of the Otago Socialist Society, which just so happens to be the sponsor of this show. Today we are having Sam Ovens in, who I'll introduce in a second. But for a quick overview of the show's topic, Sam is a local musician and artist, and also someone who would be easily recognised among the pro-Palestine crowd at the regular demonstrations. We're going to be having a discussion about Sam's past with the punk scene in music and art, and kind of an opinion from someone who's in that scene on the kind of confluence of art and politics, with particular reference to, in context of this conversation, Palestine, anti-militarism, anti-imperialism, and that kind of realm of kind of radical activist politics. So we'll get onto that in a sec. For anyone who is listening in today or tomorrow and happens to catch this before Saturday, that's Saturday the 28th, at Woof Bar, which is in Lower Stewart Street here in Dunedin. If any of my Dunedin listeners happening to be hearing this, there is going to be a social drinks hosted by the Otago Socialist Society from 4 p.m. at Woof Bar, with something of a themed topic around the rebirth of the Alliance Party, because that party has some members who are members of our organisation, and being a kind of left social democratic party that's running candidates in this year's local election, thought we'd have an opportunity to talk to some of the people who are members of it. Otherwise, our regular social drinks. So once again, that's the 28th, this Saturday coming up, if you happen to be listening to this around the broadcast time. And yeah, that's at Woof at 4 p.m. and we'll, in theory, be there for a couple hours. So, getting on to the meat of the topic, I'd like to welcome Sam to the show. How are you feeling?
Kia ora, thanks for having me on the show. Yeah, a lot going on in the world today that we're going to cover, but yeah, here we are.
It's always, with some of those topics, it's always kind of awkward to start off, because obviously there's a very... there's going to be a bit of a dark cloud hanging over this, but hopefully we'll have a very good discussion regardless. So do you want to just start off, do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit and talk a bit about your interest in where kind of politics and art collide?
Gotcha. So I'm born and raised here in Otapoti, Dunedin, and kind of I've gotten to music through my mother and uncle's music collection, and a lot of the music was, quite broad sense. French bands like Youssou N'Dour, not French, sorry, Senegalese African singer, quite political, and then Mum's punk CDs, and of course her brother Jonathan was in board games, so I had that kind of punk link in the background, growing up and knowing about that. And I was kind of like, what's that all about? And then it kind of got into the music, Mum's collection, and it kind of fed into their school friends, and getting into bands like Crass and the Sex Pistols and Conflict, very, very like hardline kind of anti-imperialist stances in their lyrics and imagery. And also all this imagery got me onto the arts as well. I was like, wow, these logos are amazing. Like, for example, the T-shirt you're wearing, Crass as well, That was huge to me. And I got into graphic design through like skateboard culture as well, which was heavily tied into punk and politics as well. Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of where it started for me in my early teens.
Yeah, so you've been in a number of bands over the years. Do you want to talk about any of that while we're just starting off?
For sure. So the earliest bands, punk bands I can that I was in was a Dole Patrol, which I'm still friends with a lot of the members now to this day. That was early 2000s, 2004. I think we had a first jam. And we were kind of like anarcho-punk stuff, just totally riffing on Crass and Conflict, that kind of anarcho-punk sound, calling out Brian Tamaki back then, our bassist.
Yeah, the more things change.
Yeah, right. And he did a great, cut and paste, chopped up Brian Tamaki's sermons that we found they would post online back then. And we had that as like a interlude in the album, and it went down a treat with lots of people. It was great. But yeah, kind of calling out politicians, the usual kind of dystopian lyrics. Yeah, kind of leftist politics. Yeah, angry at the world, And then we morphed in from Dole Patrol to Dioxin, and we kind of had a bit more of a Conflict, kind of riffing on Conflict band still. Obviously, name dropping, they were a massive influence. Sadly, the singer Colin Durwood passed away this year. So I've been thinking about that a lot and how much he inspired me with his band. But yeah, Dioxin was kind of a similar sound and influenced by bands like Nausea from New York City, kind of crust punk bands. So that's when it really got into the heavier, kind of metal kind of tinged sounds. And then after that band, some members, a few years later, we went on to form Conniption, which was kind of definitely down-tuned, heavy kind of crust punk stuff.
Yeah, the first one that I've heard of that I remember, I probably wouldn't have seen you live, but I think like friends must have told me about you guys or something when I was in high school, yeah.
Well, yeah, we tended to play a fair bit. I think we played a few gigs at Arc Cafe, even Dioxin and Dole Patrol had. But yeah, we were pretty on the local scene, performing at the Crown and stuff when we were pretty young. Yeah. And there was lots of other venues, like Mojo's, I think, was one that was on the campus area.
I can't remember Mojo.
I forget the street, but yeah, down those ways. There's lots of little hall gigs we would play, things like that. Just community kind of sense. It was great.
Yeah, and it's all very they kind of like the DIY that you do local music. The DIY that you do local music kind of lends itself to all of these different kind of skills and thinking about how things can be organized. And
absolutely. And speaking of DIY, that's central to what we were doing. We would once I left high school, I went into building and construction, but I quickly, after looking at being obsessed with these bands and T-shirt designs, that's when I first became a screen printer. And, doing that on the side of the band, we'd make our own CDs, for example, with spray painting old beer boxes black, folding them all together. Then I'd screen print a patch of the cover and we'd just glue it to the front. Things like that. We loved doing that and making something out of what little we had,
Yeah. And so we'll talk a little bit about your kind of art background as well, because you've just opened a new studio.
So I've got my art studio here on down North Dunedin ways, and I've been setting it up for about a year. But I've got an art studio. It's like screen printing predominantly, but painting, and I tend to tinker away doing all sorts of things. Mostly just scratching my chin and having a think about the world and just plotting what art projects I want to do next. And painting a wood panel, screen printing on wood panel, things like that, as well as like T-shirt design.
Yeah. And the T-shirt design has probably, if anyone local would kind of recognize you for anything at the moment, it would probably be some of the designs, the T-shirt designs you've done for the local Palestinian movement.
For sure, yeah. So we did a fundraiser for the PCRF, Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. That was not long after October 7th, 2023. Yeah, I was like, what can we do? So I put my skills to use and designed a T-shirt, and the numbers were so high I couldn't print them myself, so I got a local printers to print them. But that was good, I see them around everywhere, and often people message me like, hey, up north or in Australia, or even as far as Scotland, some of them have ended up,
Wow.
Yeah, so people are like, hey, look, it's your T-shirt over here. It's like, great, Visibility is so important, and it's a small, it might seem like it's not much to some people, but it's everything to the Palestinian community to see that, I think. And that visibly showing solidarity. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I guess before we truly dig into the meat of it, just you've kind of had this interest via kind of like anarcho-punk and stuff in the state of the world, the state of politics, etc.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about kind of your kind of more activist-y stuff that you've done over the years. I know I've seen you at so many of the Palestine events. So
Yeah. Activism, it's weird. I'm one of those people that's like, oh, is it activism? I just feel like I'm speaking up for something, you know, and calling out these gross powers that are just killing with impunity. So activism, in a sense, it's showing solidarity with the communities, the marginalised communities that are suffering, and whether it's raising funds for them, for aid, mutual aid, things like that, or just being there with them when they have rallies. That's predominantly what I do. Yeah, what I have done. Yeah, so things like that I find are crucial, and just gathering people together and being more community focused is crucial to these movements. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we'll get into the meat of it, I'll say. There's obviously the like this being one of the first, I wouldn't actually quite say it's the first, but certainly one of the first acts of genocide, of ethnic cleansing, kind of crimes against humanity on kind of this scale that has been so thoroughly covered. It's the live streamed.
Yeah.
It's a live streamed crime before the world, and I wouldn't quite say it's the first. That this is something that's been starting to happen kind of in the 2010s or even the 2000s. I mean, I remember way back in the day, you would get kind of you'd always have that friend who was really into like Live Leak or something, and you'd see kind of this war footage circulating on the internet, but you kind of had to have that friend who was searching it out. I think the big difference today is that it's close to inescapable.
Exactly.
So with with that being the case, what do you think it is about kind of creating an artistic way of kind of engaging with these events and trying to say something and trying to do something that kind of cuts through in a way that maybe all of this kind of like, raw footage of quite very harrowing events maybe doesn't quite do?
So you're saying what art sometimes doesn't do that?
Well, no more. What about art is it that kind of cuts through where maybe that doesn't?
I think being is loud and persistent with it. Like just, for example, I'm just non-stop in my art at the moment and just online, chronically online probably. But it's like my art used to be a bit more broad, but now I'm really focused on this, particularly Palestine, this issue, and it's just kind of, I can't look away, so I just keep pushing it. I think just keep pushing it and showing people through art or music as well, through platforms. I think of that all as the same artistic hub and outlet, whether it was visual or sound. It's all creative process to me. So yeah, I just be persistent with it and as loud as possible. Yeah, it's like I didn't used to be like visibly showing like politics. Like I would wear like band T-shirts and things, but now I'm more like wearing keffiyeh, wearing Palestinian embroidered flags and things like that. It's just I can't. I feel like I can't not wear that or be visible with that. And I think so fashion comes into that as well. I've always liked playing on authority with berets and things like that. So and it all comes from this punk style and resistance. So I think I toy with that as well as part of the mechanism to be visible and push the anti-war agenda, anti-genocide, just by being seen, I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
I was a bit over a couple of years ago now, I did a talk for the Society to commemorate the the February 15th protest in 2003, the really big,
Oh,
we're going to
yes.
stop the Iraq War, the worldwide one that
Yeah.
people who were around it, this is a little bit before my time, but people who were around at the time very much remember, and of course commemorate the beginning of the Iraq War itself. And while I was doing that, I threw myself into the punk music from that time.
Gotcha,
Not
I
just the
see.
punk music,
Yep.
it was protest hip-hop and stuff around
Yeah.
as well, but generally enmeshed myself with the kind of the politically aware music of that time. And I found that I knew, quite a lot about that conflict, about what the US had done, what US aligned groups had done, the kind of justifications used, this kind of argument that, it had to be done because Saddam was an evil dictator, and I certainly am no fan of Saddam, but, how far can you push a justification like that when you see the consequences, especially when, people were shouting from the rooftops how clear it would be that there were going to be severe consequences with going ahead with that. But I found that as much as kind of intellectually I could engage with what actually happened back then during the 2000s, what actually happened in Iraq, what people were saying, what the protest movement was doing, there was something about listening to that music that gave it that kind of emotional resonance.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because I was about to segue into that kind of thing because at high school I was in my fifth form practice exams when 9/11 hit, and a lot of the punk bands I was listening to would talk about it, and so I kind of got a lot of my politics from the music, and I was like, oh, what they're saying on TV, on the news about all this, and then it's quite different narrative to what the punk bands were saying, and I was like, it made me look at things a bit deeper and question things and question authority a bit more. Not this dressed up kind of propaganda you see on the 6 o'clock news or whatever. So it was on my radar, a lot of that Iraq War stuff as well. I kicked about with some of the socialists briefly as well back then, and they were like, same as the punk band narrative. They were like, yeah, this is going to have severe consequences. This regime change kind of vibe that's going on now. It's so connected, and
once again, the more things change.
Exactly. It's just it feels. I refuse to fall into despair. Keep going and keep speaking up and speaking out. I still have that sentiment that listening to those bands back then. Right now, I think it's crucial.
Yeah, and one thing I did want to talk a little bit about is this kind of it's not just in punk, but punk is one of the most obvious genres for this.
Totally.
But that kind of way in which punk and some other genres, like some of the hip hop from the 1990s and early 2000s.
The Mortal Technique comes to mind immediately.
Yeah. I mean, some of the kind of very kind of like socially conscious stuff from the 1990s, A Tribe Called Quest, Wu-Tang Clan, et cetera, et cetera. Public Enemy, of course. Yeah. Can't forget them, NWA, et cetera, et cetera. And there is this way in which, because it's a response to these kind of injustices of the day, there is a way in which this music, because it carries on long after it's released, kind of carries the torch of of the feelings and the politics of those days. And I was wondering, because you obviously are very embedded in music. Like I know you as someone who has like a very broad taste in music, listens to a very wide variety.
It's a bit obsessive.
But I guess I think there's something interesting that I think we could talk about the way in which music that wasn't necessarily just released for a particular thing, but there's a general resonance that it has even long after it's released, and the things they're commenting on,
for sure,
along in the past.
So, like, Crass is a great example of that. I mean, I've often heard them criticised as being like, "Oh, they're not relevant anymore" or something. It's like, yeah, they're definitely relevant.
Yeah,
they're talking about they were talking about feminist issues and, anarchism, radical politics.
Yeah, I mean,
still needed today.
Yeah. The one I was thinking of was Discharge.
Oh, one of my faves.
Because there's something a bit general about oh God, I've forgotten. You'll know. You'll have to correct me. The name of their very famous album, the first one.
So there's Y, which was the kind of an extended EP.
See.
Oh, Hear Nothing, See Nothing, Say Nothing.
Thank you.
1982.
Yeah, I was going to.
Juggernaut of an album.
I was going to say it, but I was going to get it the wrong way round. So yeah, I needed you to come in there. Yeah. But a lot of that is obviously there's a huge focus on militarism
for sure
in that album.
Yeah,
and it's quite experimental. There's a lot of almost sound collage-y elements to it.
Absolutely.
But I mean, I listened to that quite recently, and it feels just as urgent and primal as ever.
I introduced them to that Y album just the other day, and they're like, "That is a nuclear album when it dropped in '81." It's just a massive wall of sound and noise, and just this brutalist kind of statement against the war machine. And all the imagery they used was from 70s anarchist and prison rights, anti-war movement, even lyrics as well were kind of taken from those kind of pamphlets and booklets. Yeah, so Cal, the vocalist, had quite a lens on all of that those kind of radical left politics. Yeah,
and there's echoes of it and everything that was inspired by it. I mean, I'm huge, since I was a fairly young teenager, huge thrash metal fan.
Yeah,
just absolutely love it. I love the obscure stuff.
Same.
I can't say I love all of the stuff the big bands have put out, but I mean, all of them, I think, at least had their prime.
Yeah.
And, talk to someone who might just kind of be wearing a Metallica t-shirt these days, and they might not necessarily have particularly strong thoughts about politics because it's such a big band. You know, people just listen to it because they like the tunes.
For sure.
But
they covered Discharge.
Yeah, they covered Discharge. You go back, you go and listen to tracks from Ride the Lightning, from Master of Puppets, and there's still that urgency. There's that kind of despair and fury about war, and it's all there, and it all comes rushing back when you listen to it.
Yeah, I listen to Discharge regularly. Actually, it's because it's such a blunt and quick release. The catharsis of just I'm so angry at the world and this injustice. Here's this perfect album to kind of carry that anger and weight and not let be more against these things. It's a reminder, it's a reminder to keep fighting back, as their song, Fight Back,
Yeah. So I think we might move on from music just for a little bit and talk about some of the other artistic forms that kind of express that kind of politics, especially the visual stuff, the screen printing, everything else.
It's interesting because it's the same thing, really. It's album art.
It is, yeah.
So when I after I did my building course and a bit of screen printing, I was like, I want to less commercial screen printing, so I want to do more artistic stuff. So I went to art school here and kind of majored in printmaking, but a lot of I was looking at pop art, Andy Warhol, those classic kind of vibrant screen prints, but the projects I ended up doing was I would make fake record covers of fake bands that were just dealing with social issues and political issues and just really angry, vibrant neon artworks about the state of the world and depression and all sorts of negative things, and just kind of making a grid of them all on the wall. It's I think I did 80 of them for my first graduating piece. Yeah, so and that's kind of an ongoing project. I still kind of I come up with fake band names all the time, make lists. What can I talk? It's just a great way to comment on something that's happening, and this feeds into my first anti-Zionist piece I did in 2018 when it was the Great March of Return. And I saw this peaceful march, and you see the IDF just shoot these people down. I was like, this is atrocious. And that was, I knew about the occupation, like late 2000s. A punk friend got me onto Norman Finkelstein, and I was like, wow, this guy, I'm learning a lot about what's going on over in Palestine from this guy. But I made this artwork, in a response to that massacre, the Great March of Return, and it was like the fake band was called Iron Zion, and I called the album title "Heavy-Handed Hypocrisy," and it was the Israeli flag, and it had images of the massacre and of Netanyahu and Trump in front of the embassy, because he was trying to move the American embassy back then as well. So I was like, these politicians are just the most vile. Oh. So I made an artwork about it. And that was when my eyes were really opened to Zionism and how nasty colonization is. And I've kept making those kind of artworks since. But so probably went off topic a bit there, but the art I was inspired by, like I said, it's a lot of those Gilbert and George, big, vibrant, a lot of queer artists, graphic design. It fed into all the skateboard art that I loved as well, illustrative. Yeah, that was really the basis of it. And local artists as well, like Zoe Hall, massive inspiration. There's so many, it's hard to kind of name drop. But that's the art I was into stemmed from punk album covers itself. You got your Ed Repka thrash album art, stuff like that. Was massive to me. All these and punk bands like Inepsy with Shaney, the Canadian kind of Motorhead Discharge kind of stuff, and the vocalist guitarist. There's also the artist. He does like these amazing kind of apocalyptic, airbrushed 80s thrash metal stuff. It's just, I was like, wow, this is amazing. That was a massive influence on me as well. And I would do hand drawn art for friends' bands and my own. So I kind of did a lot of the art for all of my bands, really.
One thing that interests me, I say interests, it's very it's interest makes it sound like a positive thing. I'm talking about something very negative, of course. Interests me is the way in which I'll cycle back a little bit. Something that interests me that I've been thinking about a bit is there's this quote, I think it's Adorno, it might be one of the other Frankfurt School guys, but there's this quote about how you could no longer write poetry in the aftermath of the Holocaust. How do you write poetry? How do you create these beautiful artistic things in the aftermath of something so horrible, in the aftermath of I think it was called The Twilight of Humanity, something along those lines. And I've been thinking a little bit about that today, because one thing you can say is that unlike any war before it, World War II was a media war. When you're in high school, you see images of soldiers and destroyed cities and the camps, and you get a feeling for the sheer destruction of the era. And I listen to it. My taste in music is kind of a few exceptions earlier on, but mostly kind of 60s through 90s music and more recent stuff. And obviously, however it was done, we were able to continue making poetry, continue making these beautiful things. But I've been thinking about that a lot, because you see these images coming out of Gaza, you see the sheer scale of destruction there. You also see the incredible swathe that the IDF has cut through, not just the Palestinian territories, but all of these other countries you see.
Yeah.
Bombed out, destroyed villages in southern Lebanon, bombed out buildings in Iran now.
Yeah.
Sites that were, listener, imagine my heavy air quotes, military sites in Yemen that have been bombed. And I get kind of a similar feeling. Like, how do you continue to make beautiful things after that?
Well, this is all happening, or just the immediate aftermath. Yeah, I think that's part of the human condition to want to remind people. I think it's the core thing I would say where it comes from is this: you want to remind people that there is hope as well. I suppose once the bad thing has ended, we carry on and we make sure it doesn't happen again. But it's the paradox of it's happening again. So it feels like a cycle of adversity sometimes, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. But it's a human condition to want to create, because you want to hold on to that beauty to feel human. You want to share as much of yourself or how you feel, whether it's beauty or despair, I think you just have to keep going sometimes. Some people can't, but... Yeah,
it does put me a little bit in mind of William Morris, of all people, because his... William Morris, very famous for the Morris prints and for the arts and crafts movement and what was kind of late 19th century innovations in design, etc., but also for his very staunch socialist politics. And one thing that was very core to a lot of what he was doing was this notion that you could turn the industry of the day, and this is as true today as it was then, you can turn the industry of the day to meeting needs, but it's the free time to create beautiful things in the world. That's what really matters. And that's part of why the arts and crafts movement was what it was. It was about people should be able to create these beautiful things, fill their homes with beautiful things, create things that they themselves made. That was redundant. Not create things that they themselves made. Surround themselves with things that they themselves made, and they knew the people who made them, etc. And I think a little bit about it because his context was responding to the deprivations of Victorian England. And I actually remember having very frustrating conversations when I was like 18, 19, 20, before I was knowledgeable enough to really be able to parry it. Very frustrating conversations with people who would say, we can't have Victorian levels of inequality. There's nothing like the sweatshops going on in New Zealand or, in the first world today.
Yeah.
And I kind of remember having these conversations, and there would be this sense that it just can't be like that, because you don't visually see the smokestacks and the people leaving the factory after a 12-hour shift, etc. That's a bit of a tangent, but the thing I'm thinking about is William Morris, and I think maybe there is this idea in Morris that could be good today, of even if there's all this deprivation, then the fact that we can still imagine creating beautiful things and making a society worth living in is the thing that's worth continuing for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there, really. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. And I was actually, I'll continue for a little bit because I've kind of caught the rest of my thought. The thing that I was thinking about, not, very recently, but kind of over the last few months, when I've had this kind of topic in mind, is that
I really doubt William Morris, a very well-spoken, kind of cultured man of the 19th century, would like Crass.
Yeah.
But I do think that if you were to
connections though,
dig him up and bring him back, I think there is something in the DIY movement
absolutely
that he would recognise. And it's not that, everything has to be done craft production and we have to go back. It's that when everyone's needs are met by what we could do if we rationally planned things, God forbid, all of that free time that people have, it wouldn't just be used up by people being... I think there's this kind of notion that people are preternaturally lazy, and I think stuff like the DIY movement, DIY art, DIY music, it just puts that to rest, I think, because the
desire to create is the motivation.
And that desire there's no underlying, I'm going to be super successful, I'm going to be a rock star, I'm going to be a really well-known designer. Most people go into it, probably don't even really think about that. Maybe they think it would be a bit nice.
It's just like breathing or eating.
Yeah, go into it because you want to create.
Yeah. And that was what it was like for pretty much all my bands, It's just, I'm not definitely not doing it for the money. But yeah, you just do it because you love it and you love hanging out with your friends and talking about politics and the world and having a laugh as well and looking at yourself, not taking yourself too seriously as well,
Yeah, for sure. We are coming to the latter end of the show, maybe 10-ish more minutes of the interview section. So I was thinking, you've talked about a few of the bands that inspired you so far, and I just thought we could maybe talk just a little bit more about how the kind of... not the origins of the punk music in terms of, the sonic origins, but the kind of background of the type of people who were making punk.
Gotcha.
Because a lot of it, it's not exclusively kind of a working class genre that people from, relatively wealthy backgrounds who have made what I think is great punk. But the general kind of overall kind of social base of where punk came from, very similar to heavy metal, was people who were surrounded by these industrial sounds.
For sure. I'm thinking straight off the bat, bands like Wire, who were, they were art school students. They had a massive influence on me. So there's a lot of studied and underground. It's a very underground culture as well. I guess a lot of these people come from. But I guess punk just kind of became this vehicle for anyone to have a crack at expressing themselves, where it was previously it was more of like you had to be a trained musician, So it's a massive thing. It's kind of strange to comprehend what it must have been like at the time. But hence, it was like that for me, I guess, as well, when I first discovered punk music from my mum's record collection. But like you're saying, it's kind of punk in general is kind of touted as this sort of working class kind of thing, isn't it? Bands like Throbbing Gristle, they were DIY industrialists as well. The Dada movement, so there's very kind of art centric as well. Like I said, art school students and those kind of intellectuals as well, kind of.
Yeah, I guess
the core of the movement as well as the working class and the underground.
Yeah, I guess what I was getting at was kind of it's not that you don't need talent to be a punk, because there is something to how you present yourself and kind of the attitude you bring to it that I think...
It's said a lot about punk. It's predominantly kind of attitude, and the sound and the imagery is a vehicle for carrying that as well.
But it does make it something that anyone can do it. That doesn't mean that, anyone could make, one of the great punk albums, but anyone could give it a crack.
Absolutely.
And the same is true of a lot of other genres. Hip-hop is very, especially now that it's relatively easy to at least get access to what you would need to do kind of the musical side. what you would need for sampling and creating beats, etc.
Yeah.
That's reasonably accessible now, whereas once upon a time it wouldn't really have been.
Yeah.
And then from there, you kind of just need to have a go, write some lyrics, see if you're good at it.
For sure.
And yeah, I think that's one thing about punk is that, and some other genres like hip hop, also metal, but to a lesser extent. There's certain genres of metal where you do kind of need to work up on your skill if you want to do it. But there's definitely, especially the stuff that's closer to punk.
Yeah.
You can definitely make metal, and it might not necessarily be good, but
Yep.
it doesn't necessarily it doesn't necessarily need to be, if that makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, just kind of, I guess, get some closing thoughts on the way in which kind of having these kind of artistic mediums and genres that are more DIY, that are more just have a go, kind of opens it up to anyone who wants to have a crack.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's good to tangent into, I was going to bring it up, an extension of just having a crack at it, having these tools available where we can make things with ease. There's this, I'm kind of scared a bit about the AI involvement. And, I've deleted my Spotify unethical app or whatever and I just listened to my records and YouTube or whatever. But I started coming across, like AI albums and things. I'm like, this is not good, So someone just uploads a prompt and they've got a punk album, and I've seen a lot of that on YouTube. You've got these just AI punk albums. I don't know if you've seen them, but they're quite convincing, some of them, and it's alarming. It's really strange. It's like, here is this culture that's just been appropriated and just turned into like someone's advertising, YouTube money. Yeah. So there's probably going off topic there, but you're saying it's just anyone can have a go at it, and
yeah,
I think that will override that AI nonsense I was talking about.
Yeah,
people want to have a go at it.
Yeah. I think that's what I was getting at, was kind of the way in which it makes it possible to, or it kind of in a cultural sense opens up the possibility of having these kind of artistic movements where the emphasis isn't necessarily on quality per se, but more like what you're going into it with, like what you're trying to express.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm firmly in the camp of AI is a huge bubble that's going to burst. So that doesn't actually worry me as much as it might otherwise.
Yeah, it's just I'd say I'm scared about it, but it's just like, this thing, it's just cringe, incredibly cringe.
Yeah. Not getting any complaints from me.
Yeah, and like within the arts as well, like I work at a tattoo studio as a receptionist 4 days a week, and AI is a very big hurdle for people. Clients will send us AI imagery, like, we can't tattoo that because it's complex AI weird looking thing. Like, I had no idea, So it's invading arts and everything. It's making it harder for a lot of people to thrive as artists or musicians, but I think we'll overcome it. Like you say, I think that bubble might burst. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think it's necessarily that the technology will go away, but I think the kind of way in which it's trying to be implemented as a panacea for every corner of your life, I think people are starting to realize that one of the problems is it just kind of doesn't work.
Yeah.
It can do these kind of convincing facsimiles, but of something that's not very good.
Yeah. It's like when a JPEG's repeatedly copied. It's just it's awful.
Yeah. So we're getting to the final section of the show. I've got my 2 reviews that I'm going to give. And then after that we'll close things out. First off, I always forget to do this halfway through the interview, but you are listening to Otago Access Radio 105.4 FM 1575 AM. Very happy for Otago Access Radio to have us on the air. And of course, the sponsor for this show is the Otago Socialist Society, to which I am a member. You were listening to Left From Nowhere. Once again, Otago Access Radio 105.4 FM 1575 a.m. I'm usually meant to do that halfway through the interview, but I never remember. I get too into the interview, But we'll get on to the reviews. I've brought two things as usual. One is a decidedly New Zealand piece of work, and the other is a free slot. So for the New Zealand side, I've got a book for our listeners today. That book is Peace People, a history of peace activities in New Zealand by Elsie Locke. Elsie Locke, really fascinating figure from New Zealand history. A very early member of the Communist Party in the 20s. She remained a member until I believe the 50s. Although any of my historian friends or people who are particularly know the kind of story of the New Zealand left don't jump down my throat if I've gotten that wrong. I think it may have been around the time of the invasion of Hungary that she left the party. But anyway, an early Communist Party member, someone who dedicated her entire life to creating a better society in New Zealand, not out of kind of a patriotic urge, but out of a genuine desire to see an equitable society. And also beloved children's author. Probably most people who might listen to this, if they've heard of Elsie Locke anywhere, it might be because they were read an Elsie Locke story as a child, kind of one of grandma's old, one of your grandparents' old children's stories that they read to your parents or even before then. Anyway, very interesting person, and the book itself is a fascinating document that goes over what could be described kind of peace as kind of a political program, going all the way back to the early Maori society and traveling through early colonization, the land wars, the pacifist movement and resistance, through World War I, and finishing off around the late 1980s with the anti-nuclear movement. The book was released in 1992, so it was kind of the most recent big thing had been the anti-nuclear campaign, but covering a lot of not particularly well-remembered aspects of the peace movement in New Zealand, not just talking about Vietnam and the anti-nuclear movement, but also, for example, opposition to the Korean War, which is something that most people probably don't even know there was resistance to the Korean War in New Zealand. So, very interesting book. It covers both the stuff that's well known, but in more considered detail from someone who was there for a lot of it, and also as well some of the less well remembered and less well known aspects of peace activism in New Zealand. Once again, that book is called Peace People by Elsie Locke from 1992, and just generally highly recommend it. I think it's a very good book. Elsie Locke was a great writer, and the peace movement was something she dedicated most of her life to, certainly most of her adult life to. So that is my New Zealand item. My other item, my free slot, I picked an album that I've been listening to a lot recently that also ties in with themes of the show, and that is Sacred Reich: The American Way from 1990. It's their sophomore album. Great thrash band from Phoenix, Arizona, and one that was very politically minded, very much a product of the Reagan and Bush Senior era, and a band that was tying into our conversation, stridently anti-militarist and anti-imperialist. I'm recommending The American Way, although I'd like to bring up an EP they released called Surf Nicaragua.
Yeah, I was about to say that one as well. It's classic.
Which was heavily opposed to U.S. intervention and U.S. in Nicaragua and U.S. support for the right-wing regime that existed there at the time. Very famously employed death squads to target their enemies. Very nasty stuff. But I picked The American Way. It's probably artistically their high point. Some people would say Ignorance instead, or that Surf Nicaragua EP, maybe even some of their later stuff. But I think The American Way is something that really captures not only what was urgent about the band's message, but also what was really, truly great about the band as musicians. I really think they were one of the great unsung heroes of that kind of slightly lower tier of thrash metal artists.
I think I remember the artwork for that one. It had the person with the American flag tied around their head as a blindfold.
So that's ignorance. That's not the American way.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, the American way is a kind of decayed Lady Liberty kind of at an angle.
Now.
Yeah. But some
similar
fantastic
concepts, I guess.
Yeah, some fantastic tracks on that album. It's really one of those all killer, no filler. Especially like if you're a big thrash metal head, it's just one of those albums that I think you have to listen to. There are other bands who have kind of fallen a little bit by the wayside, like Zentrix, for example, spelled with an X, who had a great album called. It slipped from my head just as I was saying it. It is called. I've lost it. Anyway, Zentrix was a great band. But yeah, it's Sacred Reich, one of those bands that are well enough known if you're kind of in the know in the metal scene. You've had a look around.
I think they played.
They did. They played New Zealand a couple of years ago, and I didn't go. And I was furious about that. Furious with myself.
Regrets.
I absolutely love them. They actually played with Voivod.
Oh, Voivod.
Sorry, not Voivod. They played with Violence.
Oh, Violence.
Yeah. Another band of kind of that same kind of later 80s, early 90s.
With strange riffs and sci-fi themes and political themes and social commentary. Yeah. Classic.
Yeah. So, my second review, if you are interested in thrash metal, if you're interested in metal, you haven't really had like a particularly big go at it, and you're looking for some recommendations from the thrash scene that aren't kind of the big four, and some of the other bands that people consider contenders for that. You want to have dip your toes in just a little bit below the surface. Sacred Reich, fantastic band, very well worth listening to. Very they've got kind of a lyrical theme and an urgency to them that very much resonates today. And as I said, they're just great musicians. They're really good at that particular style. Really interesting experimentation with some of the adjacent stuff. I actually think they got into funk metal for a bit, which is very fun.
90s?
Yeah.
Like kind of that groove metal kind of vibe?
Well, kind of like almost pre-groove metal.
Gotcha.
Yeah, they're kind of like a very, very late 80s, kind of early Faith No More experimentation.
Yeah, gotcha. Nice.
But yeah, that's one of the kind of, I think, one of the great, slightly more unsung thrash metal bands from that kind of the just below the surface, kind of a little bit lower on the iceberg, so to speak.
Of the below the bigger bands, yeah.
Yeah, and I would say that the American Way, great starting point if you want to have a look at that. If you want to have a look at thrash metal outside the Bay Area, very good, because they were from Arizona, so a little bit further away. And I think I will leave it at that. So once again, the first one, Peace People by L.C. Locke, released, I say it like it's an album, published in 1992. Very good book if you're wanting to learn a bit more about peace activities in New Zealand over the years. And the second album, once again, 1990s, The American Way by Sacred Reich. So, leaving it at that, I'd like to thank Sam for coming in.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, there's so much to consider and talk about with these topics. But yeah, thanks for having me on the show, and, free Palestine every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfect note to end it on is free Palestine, no more genocides, not in Palestine, not anywhere else.
Yeah.
Absolute, just none.
Freedom for all.
Yeah. So we'll leave it there. Once again, you're listening to 105.4 FM, 1575 AM, Otago Access Radio, and this show is Left From Nowhere, sponsored by the Otago Socialist Society, and you'll hear from me in about 4 weeks' time with whoever I happen to have on next.
The White Sox stronger by the year. The White Sox stronger by the year. The White Sox stronger by the year. The answer's never clear. You walk upon the sphere. Keep walking.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.